Our story begins with a woman talking about heroes, who are those who destroy what is unreasonable and always repaint tragedy in new shades, and heroes almost always receive a premature end because they end up being betrayed by someone they trust or fall like ducklings into an enemy's trap. But here, my friends, a certain hero had too many powers. People feared his extremely great strength and also shunned him and created fake news about him, even when this hero was on the verge of death. Even so, he continued to save people, and this unfortunately cost him his own heart. When he finally managed to save the world, he prayed to the gods, saying, "The next time I'm reborn." And then we see a young woman who appeared to be an angel shedding a tear over his body. And then we hear the brother of the hero who was reborn calling him. This hero's name is Alan, and after waking up, his brother insults him, calling him useless, and that it's a good thing he finally woke up because his father was calling him and tells him to get ready soon, and he continues insulting him, saying that he was garbage and didn't deserve the comfort he had, and he was frustrated that his father was so soft on him, wondering if the crown had any idea how much he suffered from having an older brother who was useless. But all that would end from that day on. The time had finally come, and he gave a little smile, and then Alan arrives at his father's throne and hears him saying that he was born into the ducal family of Westfeld 15 years ago, and all that time he never got out of level 1. Which frustrated him a lot. Seeing his son being a 0 was something terrible. And he goes on to say all his attributes have common values, and to make matters worse, at the blessing ceremony held the other day, he hadn't received any kind of gift. In that world, all children receive a gift from the gods as a present. Not receiving a gift was something unprecedented, that even he, Alan, as the idiot he was, should understand, shouldn't he? And Alan just listens to him and says so. And his father goes on to say that as heir to the Westfeld family, he was more than a disappointment, a failure who tarnished the family name and covered it in shame, so from today, at that moment, the ducal family of Westfeld was expelling him. But Alan doesn't seem to mind, as he stares at his family's house from the outside and stretches, saying, "With this, I'm officially free." A little frustrated because he would never have imagined that he would be reincarnated as the son of a duke who was extremely horrible. But he didn't let it get to him because now he could finally find his way, and he would seek the peace he had wanted so much in his previous life. And so he goes to the borderlands in the east of Westfeld territory. He has no idea what it's like, but he's pretty sure that no one will interfere, and he won't get involved in any trouble and will be able to live a simple and pleasant life. Unlike his previous life, no one will be afraid of him. He thought all this while fishing. Then, after walking a lot, he finds a place to rest. But he manages to see something that impresses him, saying it's a pretty terrible situation, and then we see a wolf made of rocks and a red-haired girl with a shield and sword attacking those wolves, and she thinks, "It's no use, the more I attack, the more they regenerate. I've never heard of a monster like that. At this rate, they'll get to Lies Sama." The girl behind her is worried about this defender called Beatrice, and suddenly the wolf attacks her again, and Beatrice defends herself with her shield, telling Lies to run away. But Lies says she can't leave her behind, and Beatrice says she should just do her duty, and Alan sees all this wondering what the first princess of the Edostella kingdom, Lies Edostella, is doing in a place like that. And he remembers a flashback of a man telling Lies to see that loser Alan, saying that his father's life was very sad because he lost his wife and was left with only a failed son as a souvenir. But she doesn't like that talk very much and tells the man to apologize, which surprises Alan, and she continues to defend him to that man, and then he thinks about what he could do to help her, because if it were possible, he would like to avoid using the powers he had in his previous life in front of anyone. And just as he was thinking, Beatrice is unfortunately knocked down by one of the dogs and then takes a very strong attack. And Alan will help her because those who were by his side believed in him and saw him in a good light. Lies, seeing the dogs approaching, said she saw death coming and didn't understand why the only thing on her mind was Alan, and even shouted his name, at which point Alan appeared holding the dog in one hand, and she was surprised and confused, wondering what he was doing there. He tells her that they'll talk more later, Then he does a brief analysis using a skill and ends up seeing that those wolves had cores, and that if he broke those cores, it would be the end of those miserable wolves. Then he casts a skill to delete their existence. The guy is angry and destroys all three of them at once. Lies is worried about Beatrice, while Beatrice apologizes to Lies for falling in that place. While she bleeds, Beatrice tells Alan that she owes him, and he approaches her to exchange an idea, saying that he will heal her wound, and suddenly, she's in perfect condition, without any marks from her previous wound. Even her armor has been restored, and Lies asks him what that power is, and he can't say, because he doesn't want to say that he inherited that power from his past life, and Beatrice wonders if it's a gift on a level that the church doesn't know about, and Lies says that in that case it would make sense, and Alan agrees, asking what the princess was doing there, and she replies by saying that a few days ago she had received a divine revelation, and Beatrice goes on to say that they had been guided by the revelation to Clume village on the border, but unfortunately they had been attacked, and if it hadn't been for Alan, they might have died. And then they ask what he was doing there, and he says that he doesn't want to talk in that place, and that it would be better if they talked in the carriage, but they say that the carriage is broken. And at the same moment he simply fixes the carriage, and in the middle of the journey he explains that he was expelled, and Lies is surprised to hear this, asking how the Westfeld family could have been so cruel. And he says that just like them, he was traveling towards the border of that domain, and also asked if it was all right for them because the power he had used would be extremely useful for the kingdom, and it could be a problem for someone like him to be wandering around freely, and Beatrice answered him, thinking in the interests of the kingdom they should return her to the Westfeld family, but Lies denied it, saying that she would put her friend before the kingdom, knowing that this would make her unsuitable for royalty. Even so, in a country that only survives at the cost of someone's life, she thought it was wrong, and Alan obliged. After arriving in the village, they found it very strange because the place was so quiet, and after a conversation about the possible existence of monsters in the village, and Alan saying that he didn't feel their presence, they finally find villagers and go to them who were gathered, and Lies wonders what was going on, when an old man throws someone out and tells her to get out, because he had nothing more to say to her, and when she gets up, we see that it's a girl. And Lies sees her and says that she must be the light she had heard, called Akira, and Akira asks, "Who are you again?" And Lies, a little disappointed, replies, "Well, I'm Lies at Ostella," explaining that when she was in the capital, she showed her the palace, and they even had a meal together, and Akira apologizes because it's hard for her to remember names. Lies angrily replies that it seemed she hadn't just forgotten her name, but her existence too. Alan, seeing this, wonders, apparently you already know each other, but what does Lies mean by light? Beatrice asked him if he had ever heard of the gift called Valiant, which he hadn't, and she explained that it was a very special gift that was given to only one person per generation and granted the power of 1,000 warriors. The bearer is, in other words, the hero, and then Lies introduces Akira Kazuragi again, saying that she was the current heroine. Beatrice goes on to say that the revelation Lies had said the following: "Become a guide to the light and eliminate the darkness," meaning that she was supposed to help the heroine, and then they went to have a meal because Akira's stomach was rumbling. While they were talking, she was telling Alan something about a dragon who was impressed, and she kept saying that she was just passing through wherever the road took her, when she arrived near that village and saw a child who had said that she had almost been given as a sacrifice to a dragon that was around those mountains, and the girl was very scared, hugging her. And Akira felt touched by the child and went to get details from the head of the village, and he just wouldn't talk and told her not to get involved, and the girls got worried because it seems that the villagers were threatened and forced to offer a sacrifice to that dragon. But Alan says he doesn't think that's it, but that they offered it only because they wanted the dragon's protection. After all, monster attacks in a small village like this were a matter of life and death, and that's why there was an absence of monsters in the area, because creatures were afraid of the dragon. In the middle of the conversation, Akira says that if we think about how the chief reacted, Alan was right, and she gets a bit frustrated, saying that guardian dragons and sacrifices are quite common. and Lies asks Akira where the child that had been offered is, and Akira answers her by saying that she asked her to hide in a cave relatively close by until everything was sorted out, and after she'd filled her belly, there was nothing else to do in that town, and went on to say that she thought she was going to defeat the dragon. If they wanted to go together, let them be. Alan asks her that if people were doing that, it was because they had to, and if she was sure she would do it, and she said that she just wanted to save the child. And the girls said they would go with her. So Beatrice thanked Alan for bringing them there, and Lies asked what Alan's journey would be like, and he answered her by saying that running away to enjoy peace and quiet while his friends were in danger was not in his nature. So he went with them to the mountain, and Akira begins to put together a strategy in which she would go to the peak by the main road while they go around the back to surround the dragon. But Alan prefers to go ahead of her, and Akira doesn't allow it because she doesn't want him to take care of everything alone, saying that he's not a normal person and that later she would like to exchange punches with him, but wanted to defeat the dragon first. Then they set off on the mission. And then Alan, Beatrice, and Lies start climbing the mountain with a rope. Alan a little worried about Lies, but she thanks him knowing that despite her fragile looks, she had an understanding of self-defense. Beatrice then thinks it's strange because Alan's family is always aggressive, and they notice the presence of monsters, especially a dragon, and quickly resolve it so they manage to climb up. But Alan suspects that his family has a connection with that dragon, and that Clune village was probably built for the purpose of offering sacrifices, i.e., the Westfeld family was borrowing the power of a dragon to keep the peace in the borderlands, when suddenly the volcano erupts and the dragon attacks Akira. But she manages to dodge and then attacks the dragon with a thunder skill. But it's no use, the dragon stands up and even laughs, asking if she had gone to play with him. And he shows that he was with the child if she wanted to kill him. Unfortunately, the child she wanted to save would be in the crossfire, and she gets very angry about this, and after hearing him talk a lot, she decides to cast another skill on him. But again, it has no effect. And then he knocks her out with his tail. And he's disappointed that she didn't take the edge off his boredom, and just as he's about to end his life, Alan comes along and rips off his wing, and then they all approach Akira, and the dragon, very angry, goes over to Alan, who prepares another skill to cast on the dragon, and the dragon doesn't understand how he can be hurt by a guy with a blind blade. The dragon tries to get the girls to blackmail Alan, but Lies trusts him, and he sees the way she looks at him, and how different things are in that life. So he goes to the dragon to attack him again, and before the dragon can cowardly attack the girls, he manages to wound him, and finally the dragon is defeated. Our episode begins with Lies saying good morning to Alan because he had just woken up after that fight with the dragon. Alan apologizes because he just wanted to rest for a while, but he's overstepped the mark and Lies tells him it's okay. He asks where Beatrice and Akira are, as they were training at the time. Lies apologizes to Alan for not having told him that she had the ability to heal people. But Alan doesn't see a problem with this. He had heard rumors of a miracle-working saint, but he had no idea it was Lies, and he doesn't get upset with her, asking Lies not to worry. Whether she's a princess or a saint, Lies will always be what she was to him. Akira calls Alan to train with her and Beatrice, and he goes. After training, Akira says goodbye to the trio. Alan says she could go with them to the nearest town, but Akira doesn't like carriages, she prefers to walk around. The child that the dragon used as bait became very attached to Akira, and so she decided to take the child with her, as Akira had no desire to return the child to the village. Akira apologizes to Alan about the sword, but Alan replies that it's not her fault, but Akira feels guilty because she was supposed to defeat the dragon, but it was all in Alan's hands. Then she decides to leave with the child. We then see the Westfeld receiving the information that the red dragon had been defeated after luring the heroine. The informant tells Alan's father that the heroine had the saints' help. And we see that the clay wolves were sent by Alan's brother to attack Beatrice and Lies. As long as the saint and Beatrice are in their territory, the family will have countless opportunities to defeat them. The Westfeld patriarch asks his informant if they found out where the elf is, and the informant tells him that there's no need to rush because he'll be sending the elf's head soon. The patriarch wants to bury these puppets of the gods and take revenge on the land and the gods. We then see Alan and Lies talking while Beatrice drives the carriage, Lies talking about a friend of hers who is a blacksmith who lived in a town not far from where they were called Granholm. Lies was thinking of asking the blacksmith to make Alan a new sword. Alan didn't know there were cities on the border. Beatrice says it's rare to see elves as blacksmiths, but she had a good hand. Lies says that she really wanted to apologize to Alan because her revelation ended up involving him in the whole situation. Lies tells him that he doesn't have to do any of this if he wants to, but Alan accepts. Lies is happy, and Alan asks her if she doesn't have to go back to the capital because she is the princess after all. Lies said it was fine because she was with Beatrice and she had already told her father. Evening comes, they park the carriage, Beatrice is going to prepare the fire. However, at that very moment, Alan uses the ability Parallel Paradox Create Fire and quickly sets fire to the wood to create a bonfire. Lies finds it incredible and Beatrice is shocked by what she has seen, as Alan has made everything look so easy and fast. Then they rest by the fire until Lies falls asleep and falls into Alan's lap, but she wakes up immediately and apologizes. Alan says it's fine. Beatrice laughs at the situation and says that since they're engaged, it wouldn't be a problem for them to sleep on each other's laps. Lies was very embarrassed by what Beatrice had said. Lies says they were engaged. Beatrice agrees. Alan says that even then she could sleep. He didn't bother. Lies embarrassedly said that it bothered her. Beatrice and Lies fall asleep by the fire and Alan thinks that spending time like that was the first time he had been reincarnated in that world. The first time Alan and Lies saw each other, it was also a beautiful moonlit night. And then he remembers looking at the moon and Lies saying that the moon was beautiful. Alan didn't know Lies and asked her who she was. She apologizes for not introducing herself and says she is Lies at Ostella, and that he was counting on Alan from then on. And he doesn't understand why she said she wanted to count on him. And she was embarrassed to explain that Alan and she were engaged, at least that's what she knew. And he's surprised by what she says. Perhaps the peaceful life Alan had always wanted would be something like that. Then, after dawn, the trio arrived in the commercial part of the city of Granholm with lots of people out shopping. Granholm is such a lively place that it didn't even feel like a border. Beatrice says that adventurers and wanderers sometimes pass through there precisely because it's on the border. And then they arrive at the house of Lies's blacksmith friend. Lies believes that the blacksmith will forge the best sword for Alan. Beatrice thinks it's strange because normally the sound of hammering swords echoes outside. Lies thinks she might have left. Beatrice finds it suspicious for someone who doesn't care about anything other than making swords. Alan approaches the house and calls Lies because the door seems to be unlocked. And then he opens the door. Lies comes in along with Beatrice shouting for Noel to check if she's home. There are several shields and swords made by her attached to the walls, and they are all very well made. Alan is amazed to see that the swords forged by Noel are better than his own. Suddenly Lies screams and Beatrice and Alan go to her and Lies shows them that Noel is on the floor. Lies starts to get sick, but Beatrice picks up Noel's body and asks if Lies has forgotten the usual. Noel was asleep. Alan then asks if every time Noel faints from exhaustion, Lies heals her. Lies said yes, she hadn't seen Noel for a long time and was startled. Beatrice says that when Noel starts forging a weapon, she doesn't eat, drink, or sleep. She practically doesn't stop until she finishes her work. Lies always tells Noel to take better care of her health, but it doesn't seem to do much good. And then Noel finally gets up, stretching and saying that she slept so well. She was surprised because it had been a long time since she had seen Lies and Beatrice. Then she asks who that guy is who was with Lies and Beatrice. Beatrice replies to Noel saying that he is serving as Lies's guard and his name is Alan. And after introducing themselves, Noel understands that Lies wants her to forge a sword for Alan, and Lies confirms by saying that she always understands very quickly. Noel replies that it won't work. Lies is frustrated and doesn't understand. And Noel says that she has a backlog, she was too busy. Alan wonders if Noel is really Lies' friend. Lies is frustrated because she thought they really were friends. Noel told Lies that they were really friends, but that it had nothing to do with anything. Beatrice says that if you don't have time, there's nothing to do. Then Noel says that Alan already had a sword. And Alan shows that the sword was actually broken. And Noel says that a person with no skills wants to wield her sword, blaming the fact that the sword is broken on Alan's inefficiency. She then uses her skill to check the sword and sees that it has been used to its full potential. The sword was completely dead. She wondered how he had managed to use it up to that point. And then she tells Lies that she's changed her mind, she's going to make the sword for him. But before that, she wanted to ask Alan something. Noel asks Alan if he would like a sword that surpasses the sacred sword. And Beatrice says that the sacred sword is the one that only the hero can wield, they only exist for heroes, and Noel was offering a sword that surpassed the sacred sword. It didn't make much sense to her. And Noel confirms it would be a piece worth much more than any weapon she had forged back home. No matter how talented the blacksmith, if he doesn't know who is going to use the weapon, he can't do his best. It was necessary to have a user to match. Until now, she hadn't found anyone like that, and after analyzing Alan's broken sword, she valued him. And again, Noel asked if Alan would agree, and Alan, having heard everything she had said, had no reason to refuse. And then Noel gets to work, kicking everyone out of the house and remembering Vanessa. And there's a flashback of her forging a sword. Whatever the cost, Noel was going to forge that sword that surpasses the sacred sword. Lies was worried, hoping that Noel wouldn't overdo it. As long as Noel was forging that sword, she was going to pay attention to the trio. As they were going to stay in that town for a few days until Noel had finished forging the sword, they decided to look for an inn to stay in. However, there was a girl in a tree spying on the trio to notify the man who was working for the Westfeld family. And that mysterious girl goes to him to tell him, and he learns that the saint was there. It would be very convenient. But one thing bothered the old man, according to the Westfeld's information, was that the saint's personal guard was just one horsewoman. And the girl who was notifying him asked if perhaps they had the contract in that city. The old man wonders who the boy is who is with those girls. The old man believes that they need to investigate a little more. Then we see the inn where the trio will spend those days. Alan asks what they were going to do. Beatrice asks him why he doesn't relax and spend his days at ease. After all, that's what he always wanted. And Alan doesn't disagree. Lies asks him, since they were there, why Alan doesn't look at the Adventurers Guild. Beatrice believes that he could get a good price for the material he has collected from the Red Dragon. Alan thinks Beatrice is right, and since he was kicked out of the house, he had no money at all. Then he asks what the two girls are going to do. Since Lies and Beatrice were on a trip, they were just going to walk around the city. Alan understands and says goodbye for the time being. Beatrice asked if Lies was sure. Because they wouldn't be able to handle it alone, Lies confirmed that she didn't want to get Alan involved in any more trouble. Alan then arrives at the Adventurers Guild where he is seen by the receptionist. She goes to evaluate the item and is shocked that it is a dragon scale, as it was a very valuable item and he had a lot of them. Then she goes to the manager saying that it was great. Until the old man with the mustache stands next to Alan with the girl and asks if Alan has a moment. He wanted to know details about that dragon. Alan found it strange that the man didn't introduce himself, so the old man apologized for not introducing himself and said that his name was Horace and the girl's name was Mylene and she was an Amazon. The old man asks if Alan got those scales on his own or if he had any allies. Alan replies that he would never be able to defeat a dragon on his own, and the old man points out that he was with the hero. And Alan says that he kicked very well. Just as they were talking, the receptionist returned with the dragon scales that Alan had collected in her hands, apologizing for the delay. She finished the evaluation and was already going to bring the money. Horace asked to be excused and said they would see each other another day. After leaving the place, Horace wanted to know what kind of person Alan was, but to him he was just an idiot with no gift, and he was upset by this. Mylene feels a little uncomfortable with Alan. It was dawn, and so the trio went to Noel to see if she had finished the sword, but when they got there, she had exhausted herself again and was asleep on the floor. Lies healed her again. She stood up and apologized, saying that she had finished the job and that it was the best sword she had made so far. Alan takes the sword and checks it out, saying it's a great sword. Noel asks to test the sword. And then Noel and Alan go into the forest. Alan asks why Noel is a blacksmith. She asks if it's so strange. Alan says that it's usually the dwarves who are suited to it. Noel tells Alan that she doesn't know where she came from and doesn't know her parents. She was found by a dwarf called Vanessa, who looked after her, but Vanessa wouldn't teach her how to forge a sword, but she managed to learn anyway. Suddenly, Horace appears in the middle of the forest with Mylene and asks Alan if he came after the monsters the guild asked for, and Alan says it was something like that. Horace said that when he returned, he would like to hear more stories. Then Noel shouts for Alan to come. And Noel looks at Horace and Mylene and finds everything very suspicious. Horace tells Mylene to follow Alan and Noel to find out more. Then Alan is testing the sword against some monsters. And Noel asks to check the sword, using her gift to check the strength, the edge and conditions that other people can't see. After checking, she says she was right about Alan. Alan is happy not to disappoint, but she wants to see him against a stronger monster, and they start to go deeper into the forest. And at the sight of a gigantic creature, Noel has a flashback of how Vanessa died to that creature and asks Alan to kill it with his sword. Our episode begins with a flashback of Noel as a child, drawing the attention of Vanessa, who didn't stop for a second to pay attention to Noel as she was completely focused on forging a sword. Noel gets angry because she's hungry and Vanessa pays no attention until she gets tired and decides to find something to eat on her own. Then she comes downstairs and says she's eaten everything in the house. She tells Vanessa that there were so many tools there and asks how she used them all, but Vanessa doesn't answer. She doesn't even pay attention. Noel gets very angry with Vanessa, picks up a sword, but it's too heavy for her, and she ends up falling to the ground and knocking over everything around her. Even though this accident has happened, Vanessa keeps hitting the hammer on that sword. Then Noel sits down next to Vanessa and tells her that she just keeps hitting that sword and asks what's so funny. Noel also says that afterwards Vanessa gets sick from not drinking or eating for days. Noel is surprised that she is still healthy and asks if Vanessa is stupid, calling her an idiot. However, Vanessa doesn't pay the slightest attention. Dawn comes, Noel sleeps with her face on the table and wakes up to see that Vanessa has finally finished the sword. And then comes the actual moment with Noel asking Alan to kill that creature with the sword. Alan says he has no reason to kill the creature as it hasn't attacked them or anything like that. The creature is sleeping there in the forest, far away from the humans. Alan tells Noel that whatever it is, he won't take her revenge, and she runs towards Alan, picks up her sword, and goes towards the creature to attack it. Alan said that he wouldn't do that if he were her, because that creature, Fenrir, has a barrier that nullifies any attack below a certain level. Only the best weapons, first-class weapons, could break through it. The sacred sword would be an example. Noel says that her blade is better than the sacred sword, while Alan disagrees, saying that the blade doesn't leave a single scratch on the creature. That sword was a good sword, but it was still no better than a holy sword. Alan won't stop her from trying to bring the beast down and leaves the scene. She watched the beast with the blade she had given Alan in her hands. Then Alan is telling Beatrice and lies about what he saw in the forest with Noel. They are shocked that there was such a beast in the forest, Beatrice says that the borderlands are indeed full of treacherous monsters. Alan believes that someone brought Fenrir to that place. It was as if he had covered it up with some kind of power. Beatrice doesn't understand why anyone would do that. Alan has a hunch, but no concrete proof. For Beatrice, they should all be more cautious now. Alan then asks Lies if they have finished what they wanted to do there. After all, he doesn't believe that they went to that town just to order a sword for him. Lies realizes that she can't hide anything from Alan. And she explains, about 3 months ago, the famous General Cyril, one of the strongest in her kingdom, was assassinated. No one knows why yet, but the person who did it had taken the general's head with him when he fled. Various gifts were used to investigate, but there was absolutely nothing to serve as evidence. Beatrice believes that the criminal was a demon after all. The powers that the criminal uses were unknown until then. Alan doesn't think it's common for a demon to kill a human. He imagines it would be completely indifferent to political conflicts. Beatrice says that someone in the kingdom has joined forces with demons and is using their powers. Though the reason they were in that town was to look for clues, because all sorts of people gather there. Alan doesn't know who did it, but there is someone suspicious, and the girls are surprised to hear what Alan is saying. We then see Mylene wondering how the camouflage was broken, and she remembers when she saw Alan's ability, wondering what kind of power it was. Mylene thought Alan was a trivial opponent, but she didn't care anymore, so she went to Horace. He asks how it went, and Mylene tells the old man that she has nothing to report. Horace tells Mylene that they will be making the move soon. After all, there was nothing interesting there, and they didn't need to prolong their stay. Horace then sends Mylene in search of the elf saint's head. And she's a little frightened to hear what he's ordered, and Horace doesn't understand because a brave, battle-loving Amazon doesn't want to see blood. Horace doesn't want to hear anything from Mylene other than yes. Then it's night and Noel continues forging another blade. She remembers Alan saying that that sword hadn't gotten there yet, but depending on how it was refined, it might be able to strike Fenrir. After Alan used it, he felt that the sword could be improved. Noel asks Alan to tell her everything. He said he would tell her, but he didn't want her to do anything rash. And Noel simply doesn't want it for her job, just as she does before, and Vanessa too. Noel was almost there, but ends up falling asleep, and in the flashback, she asks Vanessa to run away soon. Seeing that Horace and Fenrir were there, Horace said that Vanessa was an exceptionally talented blacksmith. And unfortunately, that was a problem for them, because they no longer wanted blades on a par with the sacred swords. Vanessa begins to fight Fenrir, but Fenrir's barrier destroys the sword, and then with a single bite, he ends Vanessa's life. Fenrir didn't kill Noel, because just as he was about to walk up to the girl, Akira, the heroine appeared and used her divine lightning ability on him. Akira manages to strike Fenrir with an attack directly to his head. Horace thinks it's time to back off and leaves at the same moment. Akira tells Noel that they need to take care of Vanessa's injuries. Noel doesn't understand why Akira was able to attack Fenrir so easily and her sword couldn't make a scratch. Then Noel gets up feeling very light and opens the door to find out if it was lies. Alan keeps thinking that he told her not to be reckless, but it doesn't seem to do much good. Then Noel finally finishes the blade. She walks into the forest with the blade on her back, looks back and apologizes to Alan because she was going to use his sword for a moment. Noel walks up to Fenrir and prepares to attack him, but the beast opens his eyes and strikes Noel with a single blow. Horace showed up at that very moment, saying he was looking for Noel. Horace hadn't imagined meeting her in the Borderlands. Noel believes that Horace will kill her just as he did Vanessa. Horace didn't remember, but at one point he did, because he found Noel very familiar. She was the elf who was with the dwarf blacksmith. Noel is very angry about what Horace has done. Horace says that master and apprentice being killed by Fenrir was too much of a coincidence. She tries to attack Fenrir, who just dodges her attack and counterattacks, but she can't land a blow on Fenrir. Before Fenrir finished her off, Horace wanted to ask her a question. But Noel replies that she has nothing to say to him. and he asks if she would consider serving him. She doesn't understand. Horace says he's heard she has a special power and it would be a waste to let her become Fenrir's feed, and she doesn't understand what he means. Horace talks about the eyes of the sovereign fairy, the Grom Vision. There are only 5 known innate gifts in this world, and this was one of them. He goes on to say that she didn't have to worry, she would win for it. He had more people in his service, and they could accept it immediately. And she thinks she's talking about the Amazon Mylene. Horace says that despite appearances he is very pious, Mylene lost her homeland and had nowhere to go, so he brought her. Horace says that they destroyed the place themselves, but that was a mere detail, and laughs, making fun of the situation. Noel would rather die than serve him. Horace thought she would make the smarter choice. Noel said that when she was in the next world, she would pray hard that he would suffer a lot. Horace thinks it's a shame she refused, so he sends Fenrir to attack her. Just as Fenrir was about to attack Noel, Alan arrived and counterattacked Fenrir. Alan apologizes for being late. Horace acknowledges that he misjudged Alan's abilities. For Horace to rush to the aid of an ally in trouble was splendid. But he asks Alan if it wasn't reckless of him to abandon his main post to go there. Alan doesn't understand what he means. Horace says that if anything happens to the princess, he'll be too late to stop it. And at that very moment, Mylene was walking with that camouflage inside the inn where the trio were, but she was caught by Beatrice and Lies. Mylene wonders how they managed to see her. Alan told Horace that as far as presence camouflage was concerned, there was no problem as he had placed an invisibility barrier around Lies. Horace is incredulous. Alan goes on to say that he's been the target of plans just like that so many times in his previous life that he's even tired of them. Mylene then pulls out her dagger to fight Beatrice, who doesn't give up either and clashes with Mylene. Beatrice tries to strike a final blow, but Lies, calling out to Beatrice, takes away her concentration, and Beatrice ends up being attacked. Then Mylene goes to Lies to attack her, but just as she was about to finish her work, Beatrice attacks her from behind. Alan, using his gift to see how the battle was going, saw that they didn't need any help, and in the end Mylene and Horace's assassination attempt didn't work. Horace doesn't believe it. For Alan, it's no problem if Horace thinks he's bluffing. Horace thinks he's in control of the whole situation because without a holy sword, Alan couldn't inflict even a scratch on Fenrir. Then Horace tells Fenrir to go and sink his teeth into the boy, calling him insolent. Noel became desperate because she didn't want to see that scene happen again. But Fenrir is unable to attack Alan, who lands a fatal blow on the creature. Horace doesn't believe it and quickly runs away. Alan carries Noel on his back after healing her as she fell asleep afterwards. Also, she had spent the night forging the sword, so there was no way she was really tired. Until Alan finds Lies, asking if he wasn't hurt, and Noel was hurt too. But neither of them were. Suddenly, Noel wakes up very frustrated because Alan was carrying her without her permission and asks Alan to put her down. Then Mylene was strapped into a chair and was also freed from Horace's subordination effects, so she could speak freely too. But Mylene didn't say anything. If she continued in this silence, the group would never understand her situation. For Beatrice, it would be better to take her to the capital for a trial. Lies doesn't believe that Mylene is a bad person. Beatrice completely disagrees with Lies. After all, Mylene almost killed them both. Lies tells Beatrice that Mylene didn't try to murder her of her own free will. Besides, there must have been someone waiting for her to return, but Mylene says that Horace and Fenrir burned everything down and she had nowhere to go. Upon hearing this, Noel remembers when Vanessa took her and kept her, and she decides to let Mylene go and keep her too, just as Vanessa did. Beatrice didn't agree because there was still the possibility of her attacking Lies again. Noel tries to reassure her by saying that if that happens, she'll come and get her and give her a good scolding. Mylene starts to cry and Lies asks if she's all right. Beatrice thinks she spoke too harshly and apologizes. Alan goes into the forest to find out if everything was really over by then. Horus was already a long way away, sitting on a rock and saying that he had gone far enough. Yet Alan's power eludes Horus, who wonders who he is after all. And at that very moment, a creature casts an ability to hit Horus, and he almost gets hit. After a while, Alan found Horus, but he was no longer alive. Alan had a lot of things to ask Horus, but someone else had got there first. The creature was sent by the Westfeld family and went to the patriarch at his mansion to tell him that it had put an end to Horatio before the information leaked out. The patriarch replies that what the demon did was the least of it, because in the end, Horus's mistake fell squarely on the demons. Alan's brother is annoyed because Horus and Mylene made such a fuss, and in the end killed neither the saint nor the elf. And so far, all the demons had done was take off the head of a general. Alan's brother sneers at the demons, saying that they don't look like much. The demon replied that they would deal with the saint and the elf at that moment. The Westfeld would take care of the hero and the archbishop. Our episode begins with Lies in a carriage on a dangerous journey down a mountain until an accident happens. A knight tries to hold Lies back so she doesn't get hurt. The coachman shouts that they are monsters. The knight asks Lies to stay exactly where she is. The knight who is going to fight is Lies' uncle. A monster attacks the carriage trying to catch Lies. But his uncle attacks the creature to free his niece and ends up being attacked by the monster. Unfortunately, after the attack, the monster decides to fly while carrying Lies' uncle in its mouth, but Lies' uncle doesn't let it go and attacks it while they are in the air, and they both fall off a cliff. If you don't want a flying monster to attack you like Lies' uncle did, subscribe to the channel and receive God's blessing. Then Beatrice, Lies, and Alan are in a very peaceful village. Alan asks one of the residents if they are preparing for a festival, and the resident says yes. They called it the Festival of the Spirits. They received the spirits of their ancestors. It was an annual event. It was a custom specific to that village, but basically they dressed up as spirits and danced. It was a very lively festival. Lies asks to be excused and asks if they hadn't seen a person wearing silver armor, as she was aware that it had been seen in that village. The locals hadn't seen the person before and apologized for not being able to help. In the end, for Beatrice they were just rumors. Alan remembers when he was looking for clues, and it seemed that not even the guild had any relevant information. The group didn't even know where to start, something like a suspicious incident or something. The elf thinks about the general who was murdered and says that an adventurer who always shopped there once commented on a ghost that appeared in the village. She seemed to be a ghost of the royal family and was full of hatred for the oppression she suffered from the royal family. The ghost walked among the tombs night after night. Beatrice says that ghosts are garbage, and when she hears a noise, she is startled by a huge scream. The elf asked if Beatrice was afraid of ghosts, and she said that she wouldn't be. She would never be afraid of spirits. After all, they aren't even real. Lies says that they will have to investigate. For Alan, if it is the work of demons, they should consider it possible for them to revive the dead, and Beatrice agrees with him. And the elf and the Amazon ask her again if she's afraid, and Beatrice says that she would never be afraid of that, and the three of them make an absurd racket. Then Alan said that Noel had talked about graves and suggested that they take a look at the village cemetery, and they went there, but there was no sign that anything of the sort would appear. Beatrice was scared to death. Suddenly, they meet the same man as before, and the man takes them to the house of the village leader. When it comes to the village, the leader is the one who knows the most about things, but the man was very strange, and Alan asks what he was doing in the cemetery. The man replies that he was passing by coincidence and saw the group there, so he says goodbye. The man looked very strange. There was no sparkle in his eyes. And then they're having tea with the leader, and he says he's never heard of these rumors. The village was very quiet. The leader says he understands that it's no consolation, but asks if they wouldn't like to spend the night in the house, because the next day there would be the festival, and they could stay and watch. Alan thinks about it and accepts the invitation. The leader is happy and says he'll tidy up the rooms. While Lies slept, she dreamt of her uncle. Lies thought of her uncle as a second father, and having two fathers made her very happy. Her uncle had only stopped by to say hello. He was going to be away for a long time thanks to the expedition. Lies asks him when he'll be back, and he says he'll visit her soon. For Lies's uncle, the most important thing was to believe in people in any situation. This feeling becomes a connection that binds everyone together. And then Lies wakes up after her uncle speaks. She is startled to hear a noise. She decides to get up to check it out, just like in horror movies. Through the window, she sees a man in silver armor, and she sees that it is her uncle and goes to him, who is entering the forest. She asks her uncle to wait. She runs and ends up in the cemetery. Even a hand comes out from under the ground and grabs her leg, and several undead come out to attack her. But it was a dream too. Alan wakes Lies up and asks if she's okay. And Lies simply hugs Alan, who doesn't understand a thing. And Lies asks Alan to let her cuddle with him for a while. Anyway, it's dawn. Lots of people show up in costume. Beatrice thinks it's a super weird festival. The townspeople burn a bonfire while in costume and dance in front of the fire. Beatrice finds it strange that they are celebrating, as treating the dead in that nation is taboo. Alan asks, as a royal knight, why she doesn't stop the people from doing that. Beatrice says that the festival isn't causing any problems for anyone, and Alan just laughs at her response while Lies sits quietly watching the people enjoying themselves. Alan doesn't see anything supernatural, although he does find the village suspicious. A man came up behind them asking if they didn't want to dance too, and he had no sparkle in his eyes. Beatrice said she didn't want to, and Lies said she'd like to rest, but she didn't see a problem with Alan and Beatrice having fun. Alan uses his skills to analyze the people and finds nothing wrong. Alan accepts the invitation and decides to go with the guys to dance too, so Beatrice says she'll go with Alan. Lies watches until she sees a trail of smoke passing by and hears someone calling her name, which startles her a little, until she sees her uncle and decides to go after him. He's leaving, and she asks him to wait. Lies tries to get through the crowd and reaches the forest looking for her uncle. She gets tired after running a long way. And again, she sees that trail of smoke and realizes that it's coming from her uncle. Her uncle says that it's dangerous for her to go to a place like that alone. Scared, she said that he was with her, calling him her father. And he says he's already told her that he's her uncle. Lies responds by saying that she thinks of him as a father. She kept wondering where he was all the time. At the time, she searched a lot and couldn't find him. That's why Lies believed he was somewhere alive. The uncle replied that he had always hated the royal family and had gone into hiding so that he could take revenge. Lies's uncle tells her that her father wanted to kill her, which is why he didn't like her brother's behavior at all. Lies can't understand what her uncle is trying to say. The uncle says to listen well. The king was after those who have gifts from birth, natural gifts. Lies is startled. The power to annihilate the dragon, the power to create unparalleled weapons, the power to double the strength of soldiers and bring glory to the nation, the power to identify any gift. And finally, Lies's saintly power. Any one of them can destroy the kingdom. All of them together with Lies are called puppets of the gods. Lies thinks it's absurd, and her uncle agrees with her. The king thinks that those with gifts are rebellious and will bring destruction in the name of the gods, so he has decided to kill all those with gifts. Lies is incredulous at what her uncle is telling her. Lies's uncle says he wants to save her and asks her to go with him because together they could defeat his brother. Lies apologizes to her uncle because she couldn't do that. Even if it's true, she thinks that if they talk, everything could be resolved. And she remembers that her uncle once told her that the most important thing is to always trust people. And the uncle begins to float, saying that he really had said that. And Lies is frightened by it flying away. And her uncle told her not to worry because her corpse wouldn't go to waste. Lies can't believe it. He asks her to calm down and then proceeds to kill her. However, just at that moment, Alan appears, defending the attack with his sword. The uncle tells Alan not to get in his way. But Alan responded by saying that he was the one who was disturbing his peace. Alan tells Lies that he was watching the whole time. The uncle recognizes that Alan was the loser who was Lies' fiancé. Alan hasn't come to chat and tells him to return Alfred immediately. And then he casts an ability to break the magic. Lies asks what Alan did to her uncle. Alan asks Lies to wait. The uncle says he's already dead and asks if he did it. Alan says he undid the magic that was cast on him. And Lies' uncle thanks her. Then Lies' uncle says that he wouldn't forgive him for pointing a gun at Lies. What he had said to her and the fact that he had attacked her was not his choice, nor was it the king's choice, but the demon's. However, it was true that he hated the royal family. He was the king's younger brother, and because he was second in line, many wanted his attention. Some even tried to end the relationship he had with his brother. He hated those shackles of royalty, so he decided to abandon his position and start his life from scratch, becoming vice captain of the First Order of Knights. But Lies was the only peace he had in his life. Her uncle ran out of time and asked Alan for two things. He asks Alan to take care of Lies. She's a good girl, but she's reckless, so he's a bit worried. Alan answers him saying that even if he didn't ask, he would. And the second thing was that he wanted to fight Alan once. Alan accepts the request. He wanted to know if Alan was worthy because he would leave such a special girl with him. Alan's uncle was going to fight not as a corpse, but as a man, as a knight and a father. And then they start fighting. Alan takes it easy on the old man because he's already at the end of his career. The uncle says it's the night of the spirit festival. The living and the dead mingle, it's the dream of just one night. The chance to dance with those who won't come back. Lies watches the whole fight very apprehensively, remembering her past, calling her uncle her father, and saying that he was very strong, wondering if he would protect her from the weird monsters. His uncle told him yes, until the day someone stronger than him came along. Lies begins to cry as she sees Alan and her uncle fighting. And at the end of the fight, it starts to rain. Uncle is on Lies' lap and apologizes to Lies for the whole situation. But at that moment he was calm. Lies was a real daughter to him, and when Lies called him father, he had to try very hard to hide his joy. He said it was very difficult. Lies tells her uncle that she loves him. Her uncle tells her to be happy. Lies cries a lot. Then, after everything has happened, Alan stares at the horizon, and the leader asks when Alan noticed. Alan answers him by saying that from the beginning, the village was full of dead people, and that he, the village leader, was the one in control. The old man asks if he knew because he didn't do anything. Alan told him that he didn't want to get involved. The dead might live among the living here, but the village was perfectly peaceful. And the leader even says that this old man is a demon. Alan says that to think that every demon is evil would be too simplistic. And at the same moment, several undead begin to rise from the ground. There was no point in Alan thinking like that at the time. The demon disguised as an old man says that Alan would be a great pawn and tells Alan to surrender to his power. Alan simply reaches out his hand and clasps it, breaking the demon's magic. And then he takes his sword and throws the skill at the demon, cutting it in half along with the undead. And so all the creatures disappear after he casts his ability. We then see the demon talking to the patriarch of the Westfeld family. Alan's brother, Brett, is annoyed, and his father says that letting a little girl escape wouldn't interfere with their plans. The archbishop's head was already in their hands. Meanwhile, Lies was in the carriage with Beatrice and Alan. Beatrice asked if she was all right, and Lies said yes. Beatrice said that as a knight, she would always be by his side. Lies says thank you. Alan looks at the crystal he brought back when he defeated the demon, and he knows it belonged to his brother, Brett, thinking that the only real part of Alfred was his head. And he also thinks of the general that the head was missing. Then Lies receives a call saying that General Cyril has returned. Our episode begins with Brett reminiscing about his childhood with his brother Alan. Since the day that the kindest woman in the world had left them, Brett had only been afraid. Brett showed his father a stone and said it was very beautiful. But his father only looked at him with disdain and pity. He heard the girls who worked in the house saying that he only knew how to joke, while Alan was incredible. He also remembers when he was on the beach and his brother Alan asked him why he was on the beach and if anything had happened, and Brett wouldn't answer and slapped his hand. Alan also asked why you who are still watching and aren't subscribed haven't subscribed to the channel. What are you waiting for? Subscribe so you don't miss the updates. They had many conflicts because Brett thought Alan was just like their father. And then Brett wakes up from his dream. He finds it very annoying to remember everything and says good morning to his father. His father laughs as he reads a letter. And Brett asks what happened. And his father asked when they would begin their revenge against that kingdom, against the gods. Brett thought he was the only one worthy of ruling that kingdom. Then some people whispered about the general coming back. He had served the king faithfully for many years. For Clark, who was with Captain Edward, as usual the city was full of gossip. Rumors that General Cyril, supposedly dead, had reappeared, and this had made people nervous. For him, it was inevitable to a certain extent, but that was quite different. It seems to be spreading too fast. For Captain Edward, everything was being spread deliberately as a form of incitement. Clark asked Captain Edward what he thought of all this, whether the reappearing general was an impostor or not. But Edward replies that he shouldn't be fooled by the information. Even if he was an impostor or a ghost, that didn't change what the first squadron of knights had to do. If anyone wanted to harm the kingdom, they would stop them. Clark just says. Captain Edward says that if he were there, that's what he would do. Cyril had protected that kingdom for a long time, and they would uphold his will. They even enter an alleyway hearing a noise and ask who was there. Even an ironic old man says they were scary, and then they discover it's the Archbishop. Edward asks what he was doing there without an escort. The Archbishop replied that there was something he wanted to do that only Edward could know about and asked him to come along. Clark thinks it's dangerous, and Edward doesn't see a problem as he wasn't going into battle. At the moment, gathering information was their top priority. Edward asks Clark not to worry as he will be back soon and asks Clark to take care of them. Clark watches Edward go with a frightened look on his face. And then the Archbishop and Captain Edward arrive at their destination. Where they were was the training camp, and Edward asked why the Archbishop had brought him there. The Archbishop replied that his participation ended there. Edward realizes that the Archbishop has simply disappeared. Then the Westfelt Patriarch attacks Edward, who manages to defend himself at the same time. Edward says it's not bad, yet he's so full of bloodlust. Craig, Alan, and Brett's father says that Edward hasn't changed. Edward says that the only one who would attack him without so much as a greeting would be him. It had been a while since the two had seen each other. Craig Westfelt remembers that he hasn't seen him since his wife died. Edward asks what Craig's intentions are now. Patriarch Westfelt says that Edward is a great fool because the Archbishop already belongs to them. And then he attacks again, and Edward doesn't understand what he means and asks what he's done. Craig finds it all very nostalgic, as he had crossed swords with Edward so many times in his life, but Craig no longer needed that world, which Edward is shocked to hear. We then see Brett thinking about and remembering his dead mother when he asks why their mother was asleep, and Alan replies to Brett that she had died. Brett doesn't understand, and Alan says that everyone dies one day. Brett cries a lot at that moment, and Alan takes his hand to support him. Next, we see Alan asking if Brett wasn't going to sleep, and Brett, instead of answering his question, he comes back with another question about what a loser was. And Alan asks him why he asked him that question, and Brett asks him if he was a failure, and Alan tells him that he was not. There is no value in arbitrary judgments made by other people. Brett thought it was a lie, and Alan disagreed, saying that it wasn't. Brett cries because his father said he was a failure and that Alan was a liar, and ends up leaving. And then we see Craig saying that he never thought Brett's level would rise first, exactly what he expected from his son, which makes Brett very happy to hear. And Craig asks Alan what he was doing standing there looking at him and tells him to get out of there, calling him a failure. Alan stopped standing out so that his brother would be all right, but his brother didn't understand and always treated him with an air of superiority. No matter what anyone said about Alan, he always acted as if nothing had happened, and that annoyed Brett. Brett told Alan that he didn't deserve to inherit the Westfeld house, but he did. Alan just told Brett that he knew him and knew that everything would be all right. And even then, if the worst comes to the worst, and Brett chooses the wrong path. And then Brett realizes, wondering why he was remembering that moment. And then a hooded being appears in front of Brett, saying that negotiations on their side were continuing without a hitch, and asks about Brett's side. Brett asks if he knew what his power was, and he says that they used the Archbishop to lure Edward. And the guy says that Edward's gift was problematic because he could nullify any other gift within a radius of 1 meter, as his title, Disaster, indicates he was almost invincible in battle. He would disrupt the plans they had, and Brett says that his father was already sorting it out and there was nothing to worry about. Even in the worst case scenario, he could use his special ability and put the plan into action without being affected by Edward's gift. And he asks if the other side was going to work, because their side was only failing, and another demon appears, warning that the hero has appeared. Then one of them said they were going to play knights. The demon said they were lending their strength, and mistakes on Brett's part would not be tolerated. But Brett says he won't make a mistake. In Brett's mind, he wasn't a failure like his brother. We then see Akira telling Sarah to be careful not to get separated from her near the crowd, and the girl hugs Akira tightly. Akira tells her that he said he wouldn't leave her behind, and then they decide to walk again. When the dust settled, Akira would look for a place for Sarah to live safely. At that moment, there was a demon watching everything. Akira asked the demons who were chasing them how long the hide and seek would last. Radiating bloodlust like that, it was impossible for Akira not to notice. The demon says that this only makes everything faster because she would die right there. Akira asks if they really think they can beat her. The demon doesn't disagree, but it would only be unlikely to win if she were alone. And Akira asks if they're going to attack her, but the demon says she hasn't understood correctly. Then he casts a spell on Sarah, who begins to feel something strange. Akira asks what happened, and the demon replies that all the inhabitants of that village had the magical symbol inscribed on their bodies by the demons that used their lives as fuel for an explosion. Just throw a ball of fire and the child will explode. The demon wonders if she would die in the explosion too, or abandon the child and run away. He asks again what the heroine is going to do. Sarah pushes Akira, telling her to run away. And the demon throws a fireball at Sarah, but Akira says that a hero would never run away. Then one of the soldiers told Vice Captain Clark that he was looking a bit pale. Clark replies that he was worried about the captain. And they understood how he felt, but he was the captain. They were sure he was all right. And Clark agrees, thinking that he'll still get a lecture for worrying. And at that moment, a demon appeared in front of them. Clark asks who it is and tells everyone to wait and make no move, and thinks that one look was enough to know, alone they had no chance against him. He didn't know what he could do. The demon says he has nothing to tell them and tells them to listen. He's going to tell them the truth about that world. And at that moment, there was the Archbishop and General Cyril. General Cyril apologizes to the people for frightening them with recent events, and he was in front of everyone at that moment to bring out the whole truth. And the Archbishop says that the gods were lying to everyone. The gifts are not blessings that the gods grant them. General Cyril asks them to think for a moment. If this gift had been given to one of them, had it been for another, many would have been disappointed at the blessing ceremony, because one would have wanted to be a baker or confectioner, the other would have wanted to be a salesman or traveler and have traveled to many distant lands. What restricts their freedom and decides their lives for them is the gift they receive, and none of them chose theirs of their own free will. The Archbishop says they are all slaves of the gods. The gods would be using these gifts to control everyone like puppets. But there is one way to escape from these clutches, seduced the bishop, and that was to give up his gifts. He goes on to say that it was time for everyone to free themselves from the gods and take your future into your own hands. And people started whispering about what the Archbishop was saying because they were so confused. The general says he has prepared an answer to all the people's questions and asks Brett to come forward to speak. Brett points to one side and asks people to look. And at that very moment a magical life form appears, according to Brett. But people find it difficult to replace that giant thing with the gift of all. And Brett shows off his puppetry skills. The Archbishop explains more about how the puppet works, saying that thanks to that life form and Brett's ability, they were going to a new era. Everyone thinks about what it would be like after Brett dies. And then Brett said that the demons would be there when they needed them. And everyone gets scared. Brett says that it's understandable that everyone is like that and asks them to stay calm as they have established a cooperative relationship with them. The truth that the kingdom had hidden was revealed by the demons, according to the Archbishop. And Brett reinforces that they don't need gifts, telling everyone to join together and think about the life they want to lead. The time has come for everyone to be free. Brett thought he was worth more than anyone else in the world. And while all this was going on, Craig was fighting Edward. It's very clear to Craig who will win that glove. And Edward knows that the gift should have cancelled it out, but Craig's strength was surreal. And then Edward says that he understands Craig's level. Craig says that he finally realized that everyone gave too much importance to the gifts, but it's the level that really means something. Raising your level is raising the status of your spirit. In other words, the individual becomes a higher existence and comes closer to the gods. For Craig, the level could give him the strength to kill even a god. Meanwhile, the demon was telling Vice Captain Clark that the gifts were used to manipulate them. And Clark asked him what difference it made. Even if it were true, they were still knights. If someone was going to harm the kingdom, they would stop it. They would continue to be the shield of the people and the nation. And the demon says that they are all fools and then starts killing them one by one. And Clark doesn't know what to do until he is attacked, and even then he asks the soldiers not to lose focus. And the demon says that with that wound, he couldn't do anything. Clark tells him not to make him laugh, because that's what being a knight was all about. Then, suddenly, Beatrice appears to help Clark. Meanwhile, Edward ends up falling down as a result of Craig's injuries. Craig says that Edward had already seen the difference in their strength, and says that Edward is unworthy. And then a demon appears and Craig asks if he's finished with the hero. But it was actually Akira in disguise. When the fireball was about to hit the child, she used a shield to protect her. And then she finished them all off. What's more, Alan had changed the girl's magic seal. Akira wondered how Alan knew all this. And while all this was going on, Brett was still trying to convince the people, and he was succeeding. But Alan arrives to break up the party, and Brett asks what he's doing there, calling him a failure.